Hey everyone, my name is Pedro Duarte at Duarte on Twitter. I'm a DX engineer at Modules. What does DX mean? Fair question. Let me explain. It's like UX, but as if my users are developers, like you. I focus on API design, documentation, community, things like that. Recently, I've been focusing on two of our open source libraries, Radix and Stitches. Radix is a library of low-level, accessible and unstyled components, and Stitches is a CSS and JS solution. The title of my talk today is, so you think you can build a dropdown? That's a question, but that's not a challenge. And in this talk, we're going to dive deep into the complexities of designing and building a fully featured, accessible dropdown menu. We're also going to do a live demo on how we can use Radix to help you make faster dropdown components. When I was younger, I used to think I could build a dropdown. To explain what I mean, I'd like to replay one of the many conversations I've had with colleagues in the past. It goes like this. So one morning, I'm just sitting on my desk when I got a message from Alex showing me the new design of a page we already had. And I'm looking at this part here, and I can tell it's a new component, but nothing to worry about. We need it for tomorrow's client demo. That's okay. I know I can do it. Young Pedro would always deliver. So 45 minutes later, all done. Alex is happy, he thinks he works great, and I'm feeling pretty proud. But let's just stop here for a second. Today, with a lot more experience and a lot more care, I would like to take another look at this page. So I remember that I made a button that when clicked, I would show a position absolute element with 3 items inside. And that's what I was calling a drop-down menu. I also remember that I made it so when you clicked outside, it would close. And that's where I stopped. I did nothing more and nothing less. This component has absolutely no keyboard navigation. So if I open it and I press the down arrow, notice how the down arrow just scrolls the page, and up scrolls back up. What if I press escape? Nothing happens. There is no type ahead, so if I start typing in edit, for example, nothing happens. Now, apart from all of these features that I left out, there is absolutely no accessibility. Let me show you how VoiceOver interprets this.
Entering web content. Button. You are currently on a button inside web content. To click this button, press Ctrl Option Space. To exit this web area, press Ctrl Option Shift up arrow.
So far, the only thing the VoiceOver knows is that this is a button. That's because I'm using the button element, but it has no idea what this button does. So what happens if I press enter? You see how the dropdown opens, but nothing happens in VoiceOver. It doesn't even know that a dropdown menu showed up. Okay, so I think we've seen enough on how broken this component actually is. Let's just go back to the chat. Okay, so 1 hour before the demo, Alex reached out again and he said to me, here's the tweak design. And I remember looking at this and thinking, this is not a tweak design. This is a whole new thing. And I have no idea how I'm going to be able to deliver this for the demo that's happening in 1 hour. And that's exactly when I started to freak out. To be fair, I still think I could do it, just not by tomorrow. It would take so much time. We need time to research all of its features. We need to read the wide area spec. We then need to implement all of those features and accessibility concerns. We need to worry about complex logic such as positioning, type ahead. After that, we've got to test everything. And once we finish with the testing, we may have to repeat these things again and again and again. When we don't have enough time, we end up shipping a broken component. We see this type of broken dropdowns everywhere on the web. Most dropdowns are problematic even for sighted users who don't rely on keyboard navigation, but in many situations they're completely inaccessible. There are so many cases to consider, from positioning logic, accessibility features, submenu, separators, labels, icons, checkable items, the list goes on. It turns out that building a dropdown is really hard. I'm not the only one that thinks that. This is a massive problem and it's a bottleneck because all we want to do is focus on our product, our challenges, and our users. The platform has made a ton of progress recently and it'd be nice to use it, but it's still catching up with some of the needs of modern web apps. So here we are. If building components is such a challenging task and it takes such a long time, and the platform is still catching up, what can we do? Luckily for us, there are libraries we can delegate to who focus explicitly on solving this problem. They focus on building accessible primitives for the web. By using a library, we'll have more time to focus on our product. And that's exactly why we built Radix primitives. Let me show you how it works. So we can visit the Radix website by going to radix-ui.com. And then we click on primitives and we're taken to the introduction page. But I'm going to give you a quick intro here. So in a nutshell, Radix is a library of UI components that are completely accessible and unstyled. These components can be used as a base for your design system, or you can use them incrementally to make your current application more accessible. So just to recap, when you render a Radix component, you're going to get all of its functionality and accessibility features out of the box, but you're going to get no stylings. You can then apply the styles using your favorite styling solution. Radix includes lots of components and we're working on lots more. Today, we're going to be focusing on the drop-down menu, but as you can see, there are also lots of other stuff like popovers and sliders, scroll areas. So let's talk about the drop-down menu. When you go to the drop-down menu page, you're going to see a demo that you can play with. You're going to see a list of all its features, and then you're going to see steps for how you can install, how you can use it, and then documentation for all of the API. Okay, so today we're going to be doing a live demo. So instead of taking you through the docs, we're actually going to get practical. Cool, so we're going to be using Next.js as our framework, and we can install that by going npx create next app. And because Radix is built with TypeScript, we're going to use the TypeScript template. We'll call our app Radix demo. And then we'll go into that new directory. And we're almost good to go. Now we're just going to install the Radix UI React drop-down menu. We'll copy that and we paste it in here. Alright, so first thing we want to do is we want to just render a basic Radix drop-down menu straight out of the box and see how that works. So you can see here in the anatomy section, this is where it tells us the order of which the parts go together. So we know that we need to render the root first, and then the trigger. This would be the button essentially. And as a sibling of the trigger, there's a content, and inside the content, there are many parts that we can render. Okay, well, let's go ahead and do that then. We import drop-down menu from Radix. Nice. Then we'll do drop-down menu.root. That's the first thing we need to render. Then we're gonna do .trigger, and we can just say settings here. Then we're gonna do content, and inside content we're gonna render an item, and we can say new tab, and another item we'll say new window, and then new private window. Okay, saved, hot module reloaded, and now we've got a button here that will be the trigger. And when I click on it, you can see that it opens, all the items are being focused. I can click outside to close, and everything is completely unstyled. This is Radix straight out of the box. So even though we haven't had to write a single piece of logic, everything just works, and everything is fully accessible. If we inspect the element, we can see that the trigger has the right ARIA attributes, and if we open it, we get a portal over here. The inside is where the content lives, and inside here there's also a bunch of ARIA attributes, so screen readers or assistive technologies in general know how to interpret this component. Okay, so now that we know that we can render Radix components just by rendering its parts, how do we style them? So for the sake of this demo, I'm going to keep things very simple, and we're just going to do some basic styling with vanilla CSS. The first thing I'll do here in the styles folder, I'll create a file called dropdown.css, and I'm going to import it over here in the app. Dropdown.css. Okay, so you can see there's not much going on here. We've just got a empty CSS file, and let me make a little bit more space. And here we've got the dropdown markup. So let's add some styles to the trigger, some basic styles to the content, and some basic styles to the items. So we can style this the same way we'd style any HTML element. We'll just create a selector and create a CSS rule. We're going to give it a color. Let's just make a color red, like that's, so it's very obvious what we're doing. And then we can apply that over here and save, and there we go. The color is red. If we inspect, we can see dropdown menu.trigger is literally just a button, and all we've done is added a class name to it. In the same style, we can do content, and in the content we can say, let's do background color white, border radius of 6 pixels, and box shadow. Let's add a bit of box shadow here. A bit of opacity. There we go. And finally, we'll do an item. And for the item, we're simply going to do some padding. And we can do 5 pixels, 10 pixels. And then when the item is being focused, we're going to change the background color to Gainsborough. Okay. Now we can add the class names to the right parts. So here will be content, and the items will be item. Okay, we can open this, we can see the content is showing up, we can see the box shadow, and as I hover them, we can see the background color as well as the default browser outline. That's perfect. So that's how we add styles to the radix parts. Now that we know that adding styles to radix parts is exactly the same as adding styles to any other HTML element, I'm just going to put in some styles that I've pre-written that look a little bit nicer. Another thing I've done is I've updated the markup below to create a more realistic example. Okay, so let's have a look at the code. You can see that this is almost just like writing HTML. There's no crazy logic, there's nothing special going on. It's just adding the right part in the order that we want. So for example, this is our trigger with the hamburger menu icon. Then we create the content, as we've covered that previously. The content is a sibling of trigger. And inside content is where we add all of our items, as well as submenus. So here are the first 3 items, and then we are nesting a drop-down menu root inside a drop-down menu root. That's how we do nested menus, and that would be this over here. So then we can add separators, we can add groups, we can add labels. At this point, it's up to you to decide what you want to add based on your requirements. Alright, cool. So let's start having a look at the features, shall we? By now, the most basic features have been covered because I've been using my mouse up until now. So we know that I can hover over these menus and I can open submenus, all of that with my pointer. But what if I rely on keyboard navigation? Well, you'd be glad to know that the radix drop-down menu supports full keyboard navigation. First thing we can try is, you see how right now the focus is on the button? I can press either enter or space to open it. So here I press enter, and as I do that, you can see how the first item is already focused. I can use my up and down arrows to navigate across these items. In the case of a submenu, I can press my right arrow to open the submenu and the left arrow to close. By the way, this can be configured if you're using right to left reading direction. As I continue pressing down, you can see how I can cycle across all of the items. But when you get to the last item and I keep pressing down, it stops there. Well, as I've explained, radix is quite customizable. So one of the things we can do, we can add a loop prop to the content part. And by doing that, we should be able to loop through all of the items, whether you're going down or whether you're going up. For more information, you can always look at the documentation where we explain all the props that each part accepts. Right now, we've just used the loop prop. Okay, so let's talk about type ahead. Type ahead is the feature that allows us to jump directly to an item by typing in the label of that item. So let's say we want to go from here directly to the item print. We can simply start typing in print, and as you can see, it's jumped straight there. But on the way, it stopped in paste because the first letter we typed in was P, so it jumped to paste first. The second letter was R, so then it went to print. Let's try and do that a little bit slower. P, R. That's nice. So type ahead works with every item in your drop-down menu, even items containing a space. So let me just explain that a little bit. Earlier we covered that when we press space or enter, it will actually select the item. So if I press space here, we've just selected the item new window. But what if I want to jump directly to new window and a space exists between these two words? Well, type ahead is smart enough to know what your intention is. So if I start typing in new space window, space will be taken into account in the type ahead instead of selecting the item. Another cool feature of type ahead is that if I keep pressing the same letter over and over again, then type ahead will cycle over all of the items that begin with that letter. So for example, if I keep pressing the letter N, notice how type ahead keeps cycling over all of the items that begin with N. Another thing that's pretty cool is that the radix item part contains a prop called text value. This prop is extremely useful if inside your menu you have an icon, for example, and no text. You can still tell what text you want type ahead to search for. Radix primitives also work with assistive technology. For example, here's how it works with VoiceOver.
Settings, menu pop-up button. New tab Command T, new window Command N, new private window Shift Command N, history, collapsed menu item. You are currently on a menu item. To choose this menu item, press Control, Option, Space. To close this menu, press Escape. Versal, menu item, menu history 3 items. Stitches, menu item. Modals, menu item. History, collapsed menu item. Cut, menu, copy, menu, paste, menu item, print, Command P. Find, Command F, menu item. You are currently on a menu item. Settings, menu pop-up button. VoiceOver off.
So that's how radix primitives work with VoiceOver. Alright, we're making really good progress so far. We've covered so many things and there's only a few more left. But I did tell you that drop-down menus were complex. This feature is called collision-aware positioning. Let me show you how it works. When you open a menu, by default, it's positioned below the trigger and center aligned. You can change this behavior using the side and align props. But this is the default, so I'll be using that for the demo. In the case of when there's not enough space for the menu to fit below the button, it's going to get positioned above. And when there's not enough space on the sides, the menu will also be repositioned. For example, in this case, there's not enough space on the right, so the menu will get pushed a little bit more. And if we go to the left, there's not enough space, you get pushed a little bit more. What about submenus? Well, submenus by default will show up based on your reading direction. In my case, my reading direction is left to right, so they show up on the right. If there's not enough space on the right, then the submenu will get moved to the left, and the moment that there's more space, you'll move to its ideal position again. This is how collision-aware positioning works. Another cool feature of the radix drop-down menu is something that we call submenu pointer grace. This basically allows us to keep the submenu open even if the pointer is moving away from the item trigger. So check this out. If I move up, notice how it closes straight away. And if I move down, it also closes straight away. As long as I'm moving towards the submenu, it will remain open. Sometimes you may want to add an arrow pointing towards the trigger. The radix drop-down menu contains a part called arrow, and this is how we can use it. The arrow goes inside of the content, so I'm going to put an arrow in the main content. drop-down menu.arrow. I'm going to close it. Now, when we open it, we can see a black arrow. Using CSS, we can style the arrow the same way we styled all of the other parts. So let me make this a bit bigger, and here we can do class name arrow. This is a class I've already created. And now when I open it, you can see that there's a white arrow pointing towards the trigger. Now, you also may realize that this arrow is actually touching the trigger. We may want to give it a little bit more space. We can do that by adding a side offset property to the content. And here we can say 10. And there we go. If you think that's too much, which I do, we can just change it to 5. That's nice. Now, a cool thing about the arrow is that when collision happens and your menu gets repositioned, the arrow points towards the new direction. The last thing I want to talk about is animations. You can animate the Redux drop-down menu the same way you can animate any Redux primitive, either with CSS or with the JavaScript animation library, like Framer Motion or React Spring. So what I've done here, I've created 2 CSS animation keyframes, and I'm adding them to the content. Based on the side, I'm either going to animate up or animate down. So check this out. By default, because we want the menu to appear below the button, it animates down because it's dropping down. But if there is a collision and we know the menu is going to be repositioned, we want it to animate up. This is collision aware animation. So we are able to use these data attributes that Redux exposes to us, and we can apply different animations depending on the side, even when collisions have taken place. While we're on the topic of animations, there's one last thing I want to show you, and this is what we call origin aware animation. Basically, it allows you to animate your menu based on the computed origin of the menu, taking into account its side offset, its align offset, and any collision that may have happened. So check this out. I've created a scale animation keyframe, and I'm applying it over here in the content part. I'm setting the origin of the animation to be this special CSS variable exposed to us by Redux. I then just give it the animation, the duration, and the easy. So let's open this up and see how it looks. You can see how it's scaling from this point over here. But if there is a collision and the menu is going to get repositioned, then it's scaling from this point over here. This also works with submenus. You see how the origin of the submenu is the top left. But if there is a collision and the menu no longer fits on this side, and I open it again, now it's the top right. And this happens based on every possible combination of collision detected. The dropdown we just built was so easy and so painless, but behind the scenes, it's taken us over 2,000 hours across 6 months, 50 code reviews, and literally thousands of commits. To recap on Redux, it's a library of unstyled primitives. You can use your favorite styling solution, whether it's vanilla CSS or CSS in JS like Stitches, or even a library of atomic classes like Tailwind. It's accessible, so it supports full keyboard navigation and is screen reader tested. Redux primitives are customizable, so you can make it work for your use case. To wrap it all up, why does all of this matter? Building good UI components takes such a long time. It distracts us from focusing and shipping on our product. It costs companies hundreds of thousands of dollars. Poor quality UI can reduce both customer acquisition and retention. And now, products like Superhuman, Stripe, Discord, Linear, and Figma are raising the bar for UI quality and accessibility. On that note, shipping accessible components is the new normal. Businesses are even being fined for having inaccessible UIs. We're all responsible. When we build and ship broken UI components, we're collectively contributing to a broken web. We're making the web difficult for everybody to use, but especially for less able-bodied people. Developers are tired of having to reinvent the wheel over and over again. UI components are like table stakes. It's undifferentiated work. If I need a dropdown, I just want to use a dropdown. I don't want to have to build it. That takes us to our last point. It's absolutely fine to delegate, I promise. Your product will be more functional, more accessible, and you have more time to focus on your unique product features. To learn more about Radix, you can visit radix-ui.com and follow us on Twitter, radix_UI. Cheers.